Welcome to Lessons That Last, where a researcher and a teacher talk about what it means to make a lasting impact on students' lives. They unpack the stories former students shared about their memorable teachers and discuss how we can all make a greater impact on the people in our lives. Here's Julie and Laura.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons That Last podcast. I'm Julie Hassan, professor, researcher, and big fan of educators everywhere. And with me is my charming co-host.
Hi, I'm Laura Estes Swilly, English teacher, high school level. And today I wore my blingiest shirt because you might not have gotten a bling pin last week, like we talked about. So I am bringing that to you, teachers, because you deserve it.
Yep. Everybody gets a pin. So this episode, we have a sweet story from Claire about her first grade teacher, Miss Dyson, who is the teacher who inspired Claire to become a teacher. So it's an opportunity for us to talk about our inspiration to go into this important work, and then maybe what it's like when students become colleagues. Because if you hang around long enough and you're lucky enough, that happens. But let's start with us first. So Laura, when did you first think, I want to be a teacher?
I don't remember ever first thinking I wanted to be a teacher. I remember always knowing I wanted to be a teacher. My mom tells stories about me lining up my dolls to teach them when I was very young. I definitely remember, probably in second or third grade, I took notebook paper and I pasted it on my wall in my bedroom. So like a series of them, because I needed a chalkboard, because what kind of teacher are you without a chalkboard? And in the 70s, they didn't have chalkboard, paint, and all of the fancy things. So I made my own with paper. And but then once you use it, it doesn't erase. And it was months and months before my mother realized I had pasted paper on my wall, and it doesn't come off easily. Just a little heads up in case anyone's planning that. So I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. I went through late high school, early college, thinking I wanted to do something different. I wanted to be an attorney. And I was pulled so quickly back to my roots of wanting to be a teacher within my first year of college. It just is who I was and what I was supposed to do. So I don't know how I found that out. I don't think you can remember sometimes the things that are just a part of you.
So what was it about teaching? I mean, was it the power, the great financial resources?
I think it was the community respect is actually what it was.
The fashion.
Yes. The freedom to go to the restroom, all the things, Julie. I don't know. I'm sure there was a time, and you could speak to this because Kaylin, your daughter, did the same thing with lining up the babies, right? And I think she was spanking them and I was teaching them, but I was a very firm teacher. There was a lot of discipline in my baby classroom. So I think there might have been actually a little bit of the power aspect, now that you mentioned that, just being in charge. But also, I think for me, I was always day one, a performer. And I think as a kid, I saw teachers as performers in a very probably metacognitive way, because mostly teachers are just teachers, but I saw what they were doing and I wanted to be on that stage too. And it felt right for me.
And I think that was probably the thing that made me wonder about whether or not I wanted to be a teacher, which is funny because anyone who reads anything I write knows about my first grade teacher, Nancy Russell. who is such an important part of my life, particularly my professional life. And I loved that first grade classroom. I loved the books she read. I loved the music she played. I loved the art projects. And I loved her. And she was so young and beautiful. She's still so beautiful. So I just wanted to be Mrs. Russell. And I think there was a point in elementary school when I thought, well, I don't want to be a teacher because I don't want to stand in front of people and have to talk. I'm a super shy kid. And I remember Miss Wagner's 5th grade class. It was language arts. And it was the first time we had to write a research paper. And you got assigned an endangered animal, and I got harp seals. And you had to write this little book and then illustrate it about your animal. And it occurred to me, you could teach people things through writing. And then all I wanted to do was be a writer, like a teacher that way. So I think it took me some growing up, getting a little more confident, using my voice a little more to come back to teaching in the traditional way. Plus, my mom was a teacher, and I always thought she was so underpaid.
Yeah.
Underpaid, undervalued. So I think for kids of teachers, we see how hard they work, and sometimes we wonder if that's the right path for us. But eventually ended up back there teaching preschool because I loved my high school teachers, but I never saw myself wanting to teach high school. It was always primary grades. But you, despite teaching the babies, ended up with high school kids. So was there someone in high school who inspired you to want to teach that age?
I think there were a number of teachers who inspired me in high school from both sides, right? I've met a lot of kids who have decided to go into education as a response to a negative educational experience. And once you get to high school, you see so many teachers and so many different ways of teaching and approaching people as well as curriculum. So I was influenced on both sides. And obviously, anyone who spent any time with me knows Judy Bryant was my mentor from the first day I walked into her classroom all the way through today, and until she gives up on me, probably. She just was not a teacher like any teacher I had before. She was fancy, and she had flash, and she had style, and yet she nurtured me, and she saw my potential, and she like kind of pushed me to dig in a little more and meet some of that potential. And I realized all teachers are not the same, and I can be me and still do this amazing thing and work with all of this energy. I have to have a lot of energy around me, and teaching is constant energy. And so for me, with the older kids, it's a different type of energy than with the little kids. And it's fast paced because we're constantly changing. I don't have the same kids for half a day or a whole day. I've got 45 minutes to do what we need to do. And so the pacing is really nice for me. But I think we've talked about Mrs. Barentine. She was definitely inspirational to me. And your mom was my teacher in middle school. She was my teacher in high school. She was my best friend's mom, and I spent time in her house, and I saw her as just such a special person. And so I knew that there was more to teachers when they left the classroom. And I think I learned that from your mother. I didn't learn all the things about how hard she worked because I wasn't there all the time, but I knew there was so much more to all of these people than what we were seeing right in front of us at that time. And that was special to me. And I think that was your mom's gift to me.
And one thing I did learn about teaching from my mom, which did make it appealing, is the close connections teachers have with each other. And I don't know if I was raised by someone who wasn't a teacher that I would realize that. She and Nancy Kahn, her partner in crime, were really close friends, and they loved working together. Janice Foster was a great colleague for her. So I think I did have some appreciation for the close connections teachers develop with other teachers, and that was appealing, certainly.
I can see that. And I didn't know that, but somehow our kids know that now. My kids always know who are my people in the building. One of my students just yesterday said, Miss Estes, you're friends with Miss Popa. Where is she? Is she okay? What's going on? Because Miss Popa was out all week. And I thought, okay. I don't know how you know I'm friends with Miss Popa. I don't know how you know I texted her, hey, are you okay? Where are you? But you know. And so they, the older kids especially, are much more in tune with the friendships and the connections that they see around the building. But I didn't notice that myself, other than your mom. And that a lot of that, though, came from me when I became an intern, and I was interning at your mother's school, and her friendships there, I saw the depth of those.
It's like when you're little and you get tasked with taking something into the teacher's lounge.
Yeah.
And they're all in there and like laughing and chatting, and you're like, what, there's a whole world beyond what we see.
I bet. I will admit that I was never tasked with taking anything into the teacher's lounge ever. No one was like, who's my most responsible student who will come right back quickly?
And not
Laura.
Gossip about what she
exactly. I didn't see the inside of a teacher's lounge until I was in college.
Interesting. That's so funny. And I'm thinking about the younger ones and their perceptions of teachers' relationships with colleagues. I know when I taught with Joy Patterson, our students certainly knew that we were buds, and that we had a lot of fun together. And, you know, part of it was she was always late. So on her way to her own classroom where kids were waiting outside, she would every morning stick her head into my classroom where my kids were already doing bell work and like yell something ridiculous. Or, you know, it was just, she would prank us. And I think our classes loved that. They loved the fact that we had fun together, and they felt like they were kind of in on the whole thing and the joke. And, you know, I would send notes down to her to borrow something, and she would send something crazy back. So I think our little ones in that case probably were well aware that we had a really good time teaching together.
That's so beautiful that kids get to see that side of teacher connections and feel like they're a part of it. What a community the two of you are building. It's just awesome. I love that.
We got hermit crabs once. There were two of them, and the kids insisted we name them Joy and Pat. Which she did not find flattering or appreciate, but she was a good sport about it. So with that in mind, will you please share Claire's story about Mrs. Dyson?
Absolutely. Mrs. Dyson was my first grade teacher, and for as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a teacher just like her. I loved the books she read to us and the crafts we made at the art table in her classroom. Mostly, I loved the way she laughed. She laughed with her whole body, and she always seemed so happy to be with her students. When I was in high school, I used to come back to my elementary school to help Mrs. Dyson. She let me decorate her bulletin boards and change the books on the classroom library shelf. She always reassured me that I would be a great teacher and would make a difference. When I graduated from college and began interviewing for my first teaching job, I learned that Mrs. Dyson was retiring. I was honored and so excited to be hired for the first grade position. She was leaving. She left books, resources, and materials for me to use. Throughout my first year of teaching, I would find encouraging notes Mrs. Dyson had written to me, tucked in spaces around the classroom. She remains my model for teaching with joy and love.
Oh, Mrs. Dyson.
She's the best. Oh, Mrs. Dyson.
Sweet is that. And to get the materials from the teacher who inspired you. I know when I became a second grade teacher, there were one of my favorite books in first grade that I know Mrs. Russell read was Everybody Needs a Rock by Bird Baylor. I love that book about how to choose the right rock for you. It's just a sweet, beautiful, poetic book. And certainly read that to my second graders, played the Carole King rendition of Chicken Soup with Rice. You know, there was so much of the books and poetry that I got to bring in to my classroom that was special to me because of Mrs. Russell. So I'm imagining for you as an English teacher, having been inspired by Judy Bryant, who also loved to wear some bling, that there are things you bring in from Mrs. Bryant.
Yes, and Miss Ignatius. We talked earlier in this series about Miss Ignatius and her performance of Beware the Ides of March and how invested she was in what she was teaching. And I think that my students sometimes probably think I'm overly invested in the literature that I bring them, from the shortest poem to the longest novel. If I've got it in my classroom, there's passion about it. And I think that both of those women showed me a love of literature and a love of writing that I knew had a place in every classroom I would walk into for the rest of my life.
I can see that. Having also been in both of their classes, I certainly can see those threads running through. I think too, sometimes when I think about wanting to be a teacher of young students, it's because there was this sense of magic. You know, we did seasonal things and we did poetry and we did class plays. And now, as the mother of a young teacher who teaches primary grades, she's so restricted from doing those things. Do you feel like some of the magic that you experienced with Miss Ignatius and Mrs. Bryant, you're not able to bring in, or are you just so knowing you creatively non-compliant that you find a way to bring it in anyway?
I might have some compliance problems. I don't like to be told what to do, and I am a better rule follower than probably anyone ever thought I would be. But I'm selective and I follow the ones that everyone's going to notice, so I can do a little more that they might not notice. That makes sense. But I have a gift in being able to teach AP literature because that's not a restricted curriculum. When I'm teaching my regular English or my honors English, it's pretty prescribed. Now, I can bring extra things in and I can go about it my own way, which sometimes does include giving speeches or doing performances, always writing poems and bringing in and listening to great poets read their own poems. I'm not giving that up. And I shouldn't have to, because my students, to be engaged and to become well-rounded readers and citizens, need the art to come in. It can't just be test-taking skills. But with AP Lit, I get to choose. And I feel like sometimes I get something extra that other teachers might not get. And I don't know if I deserve it, because it's such a boon to be able to choose how we're going to approach these basic skills that they need to know. I can do it with any book. You give me a book and I can teach them how to analyze character and analyze symbolisms and all of the things. So it's a little bit of a half and half for me. I have more freedom, but I also take some freedoms that what, I don't know who's going to be seeing this or listening to this, but there's always room for creativity in the secondary grades. I think it's much more restrictive for the elementary grades. The elementary school teachers I talk to and hear from, it sounds very restricted, very prescribed, almost to a lockstep pace. And that makes me so sad.
It has to impact the magic that teachers feel in teaching those little ones and in the experiences the little guys have in the classroom, for sure. That kind of restriction from responding to student interests and seasonal changes and just things that come up that we used to be able to follow that path a little bit and bring some fun. I always taught in units. When I taught kindergarten through second grade, it was always thematic units. It was bats in October, and we would read all the bat books, and we would do our writing, and the math problems would be, and I loved that. It made sense to kids. Everything was kind of integrated and in a way that captured their interest. And I don't see that being fitting into some of this really scripted curriculum and calendar maps anymore. And I think that's a sad thing. And I hope teachers like you in the primary grades are finding some workarounds for that in project-based learning or other things.
It helps to have a supportive administration, and also team, as either a subject area leader or a PLC team where they're not trying to have everyone in lockstep all the time, and an administration who believes in you, believes in what you're doing, and knows that if you're doing it, there's a reason. And maybe we'll ask you the reason, but the first assumption isn't that you're like off base or out of step, but hey, what's the purpose of this? So some of that goes to leadership, I think.
Trusting your teachers and not making assumptions that you've gone rogue.
Right. Exactly.
A rogue teacher. How dangerous. I'm thinking too about once we became teachers, even though I was primary and you were high school, we started national board certification together, and we went to some mentoring sessions offered by our district.
Yes.
And will you tell our listeners who our national board mentors were?
Well, they were Mrs. Barentine and Mrs. Bryant, Judy Bryant. So they have been with us all along. And sometimes they pop into my mind, and I'm sure the same is true for you, in my teaching day. So I know they're with me, even though they're not right there. So yeah, our mentors as adults going into working toward excellence in teaching, we're still mentoring and teaching us just like they did when we were 16, which was super cool.
It was really fun to be with them in a different way. Although they asked us to call them by their first names, Joan and Judy. Like, there was no way we were ever going to be able to call them Joan and Judy. And I felt like that as a principal. So people who've read my writing know that Nancy Russell was a teacher at the school where I was principal. She was second grade then. There's no way I could call her Nancy. Like, she was forever, even when I was her principal, going to be Mrs. Russell. But I loved walking through her classroom every day, sitting down on the rug with her kids, watching her teach, because I saw the magic of her teaching from a different perspective. And I think appreciated it even more because I understood how complicated and difficult teaching is by then. And she was such a master teacher, so great, but continued to shape me as a principal because she was a teacher leader at my school. So we had that reconnection, which was fun. I know you have had teachers who you taught who've come back to be colleagues. Will you talk a little bit about that?
I actually started at my school, and there were 3 or 4 teachers on staff who had been our teachers when we were in school. And I remember specifically Martha Bennett, who was our PE coach and in junior high. She was the
subject in which we were most gifted.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, I was her star, so she recognized me the minute I walked on campus. She was the department head for PE. And, you know, your first year teaching is such a lost time. And that first week or two where you don't even know anybody's name and you don't know where to go. And at my school, pep rallies were the most important thing that ever happened on our campus. And we were coming up upon our first pep rally. And in my mailbox was a shirt with our logo. And I don't remember what it said. It might have even been like a PE shirt. And I was like, where did this come from? And it was from her because she knew I would need it and I would want it. And she wanted me to have it. What?
Oh,
right. If you can take your teacher with you to your first days of your teaching career, what a gift. What a gift. And so I have right now 3 colleagues that I'm actually very close to who were my students. 2 of them are not only in my department, but one is next door to me and one is across the hall. And another is in a different department. Matt Swan teaches math, but he finds his way into my classroom often. We walk in together often. We share some of the same students, which is really awesome. My colleagues in the English department, we don't share students really because we all teach the same thing. But I have enjoyed being able to help them along, just like Martha Bennett helped me with whatever small thing it is. So they were all coming back to their high schools, right? They all went to school there. And that's weird too. That's hard too, because now I'm an adult, but I want to be treated as an adult, but everybody here remembers me as a kid. And so I worked really hard to connect with them as adults right away, first day on campus, and nurtured that collegial relationship, even though we already had the teacher-student relationship and had remained in contact through the years. I think that's one of the best things we can do when they all came as brand new teachers is treat them like the professionals they are. And if I'm treating you like that, you're going to believe it because they were in my class. They know I don't lie. Right. They know you're going to get the real from me.
Oh, I love that. And it just goes to show that for us, our students are always our kids. Even when they become our colleagues, we're on their side and supporting and finding ways to make sure they're successful. So sweet. So I'm wondering now with teaching, I don't think there's ever been a harder time to teach. And I know working at a university, students who are choosing to go into education right now are really committed. You know, it's not sort of a lukewarm going in. They know it's going to be hard. They experience being on a elementary, middle, or high school campus right away. They're amazing. There aren't enough of them, but they're amazing. So what do you say as a high school teacher, and what do you hear your colleagues say to students who say they are interested in going into teaching?
So I actually right now have a student who is in my AP class, and then she's also my teacher assistant. So she studies English with me first period. She comes back fifth period to help me be a good teacher. And a good TA is invaluable. And once she fully committed that, yes, this is what I want to do. At the beginning, it was kind of, I think this is what I want to do, but everybody seems to not think it's a good idea. That's the problem. And I encouraged her, like, look around, watch, you're seeing the other side of teaching with me. So I became very metacognitive with her. Here's what I'm handling right now. And this is something you won't see until you're a teacher. So I want you to know about it. Let me show you what real teaching is. And I think I could be wrong, and maybe she'll correct us. I think that helped her realize, oh yeah, I can absolutely do this.
Mm-hmm.
This is something I can do, because she had the passion. She just wasn't sure. And so I still can tell her, hey, this is why I'm doing this. And this is why we have to do that. And all of the ins and outs of the little things that you don't find out about until halfway through your second year, because you're in such turmoil, tailspin. So it's hard right now, Julie. Most of my colleagues would tell a student who said they wanted to be a teacher not to do it.
Wow.
The response is don't.
But we're killing ourselves when we do that.
Right.
I would love us, instead of doing that, to put that energy into figuring out how to make this a profession from which we don't have to discourage people. Right. You know, I hope to be a grandmother one day, and I would like my grandchildren to have great teachers.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that, except I feel like discouraging, not hiding the reality, because you are sharing the reality with your students, but discouraging kids, I'm not sure is the best path forward.
Well, it's not the best path for our profession. It's not the best path for our schools, and it's not the best path for our future, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But if we go back to that, our students are always our students, and we love them, we nurture them, we care for them. We want them to go into a profession where they're respected, where they're rewarded for their good work, where they're grown in the profession. And so I think a lot of teachers look at kids they really, really like and say, please don't do that. I don't want you to do this, because we want them not to struggle. But the truth is, everyone's going to struggle. There is struggle in all things. And if a student like mine is born to teach, like I was, and like you were, then they need to be encouraged. Exactly.
Even with all the craziness right now, there's no more important, more rewarding work than this, and no more challenging work. And I think for you and me, always, maybe not always, we always loved a challenge. Maybe it was not always an appropriate challenge.
We are who we are.
But we didn't ever shy away from a challenge.
No. No.
And that's one of the beautiful things about teaching. No day is the same. No class is the same. You're constantly adjusting, problem solving, trying to figure out, how do I reach kids? How do I teach this difficult concept? How do I deal with this family or this situation? Or it's never dull.
No. There's no boredom in teaching. That is true. And I guess I would say this, if there is, then something's gone wrong.
And you're not doing
some wires are crossed here.
If you're bored, you're not doing it right, friends.
No.
If you think it's easy, you're not doing it right, friends.
No. Although at first, I think that you do think it's easy, because you don't realize all the things that are sailing past you, right? It takes a minute. It takes a minute.
Brian was reading an article, and I wish I could remember the name of this psychological phenomenon this morning. And it said the most confident people are the people who know the least about something.
Yes.
And I think
it's unconscious ignorance.
Yes, we don't know what we don't know yet. And then all of a sudden we realize it's why all of us wish we could go back and have a do-over for year one in teaching. Although I have to say, these beginning teachers who are coming out from teacher prep programs now, wow, there's so much field experience built in. They have
Right.
so much teaching experience by the time they start that they could run circles around what I was as a year one teacher. So
Yeah, same. Their knowledge, like when we have an intern, last year we had an intern in our department who was one of my former students, and he was like a book. He just knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean that in the negative way of knowing everything. I mean, he knows everything. So they're definitely coming in prepared. Although there are always surprises because it's a classroom and there are always surprises for you and me. So there are definitely surprises for them, but you're right. They are really prepared. They spend way more time in classrooms than we did. I think I had too little, like, come see our classroom before I was an intern. And then I was an intern, and my cooperating teacher was in a very serious car accident and was out of school for weeks, and boom, I was on it. That was it. I had to take over so fast. So luckily I always had that confidence that comes from, maybe not knowing everything. That was good to go.
Oh, that's funny. And I guess it kind of speaks to all the people who have never taught but like to criticize teachers, right? You don't know. Trust me, friends, you don't know unless you've tried it.
Well, the other people who know are the children of teachers and the people who love teachers. They know. They know what we're doing.
They do. And I believe that even when you don't understand all the technical aspects of teaching, if you've been a student in classrooms, you may not be able to explain it, but when you're in the presence of a great teacher. Certainly true of Judy Bryant, Joan Barentine, Matt Swan, all of Nancy Russell.
Yes, Nancy Russell.
Laura Swilly,
Gail Schmidt.
Both my kids. So all of the teachers we've talked about today, and certainly Mrs. Dyson, who left sweet notes among all her resources for Claire. Love that.
Oh, I love the notes so much. I always think this about the people who think teaching is easy because they sat in a classroom. They had great teachers.
Who made it.
If this looks easy, you had great teachers. Right. And I'm so happy for you that you think this is so easy. I mean, really, I don't say that in a bitter way. I love that for you because I had teachers who struggled, who it was a visible daily struggle, right? You had those teachers too.
We shared a Latin teacher who cried every day, I think.
Every day.
Yeah.
Right. And I now understand why she was crying sometimes. I mean, I think there was personal life stuff too, but
there was quite a bit of crying. Yeah.
It's hard. And if you think it's easy, I'm so happy for you that you had that experience.
Right. It's like when you watch ice skating on TV.
Oh, yes.
And then you try to ice skate. And then you're like, oh, this is not how it looks on TV.
Not at all. Not at all.
Oh, well, teachers, we are so grateful for your skill and your effort and your commitment and the way that you nurture future generations of teachers. Wow.
Absolutely.
So, Laura, give us one thing from Claire's story about Miss Dyson that you're going to carry into the week.
I just really loved the way Miss Dyson nurtured and supported her student. That's it. And I have the feeling, obviously there was a connection because she wanted to be a teacher and they shared that experience together. But I have the feeling that she nurtured and cared about all of her students' dreams. I don't think this was selective. And so I can definitely continue to connect with my TA about her future teaching experience. But there are a lot of dreams to be nurtured in my classroom.
Oh, I love that. Teachers, have a wonderful week. Get out there and nurture some dreamers. We appreciate and value all of your hard work. We hope you enjoyed this episode, that you will subscribe to the Lessons That Last podcast, whether you're watching us on YouTube. And if you are, you get to see Laura's bit of bling today, or you are listening to us on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe. If there was a teacher who nurtured you and inspired you to teach, drop that teacher's name in the comments. We'd love to hear about it. Have a wonderful week.
Bye, everyone.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Lessons That Last podcast. The story Laura shared today can be found on the Chalk and Chances website, along with many more stories and resources. Just visit chalkandchances.com. You can even take the quiz to find out what kind of memorable teacher you are. See you next Sunday for another episode of Lessons That Last.